Hi, I decided to do a presentation for this module's assignment on promoting anti-racism in curriculum and instruction. I firmly believe that it's our responsibility to transform our communities towards a more equal and just civilization. Systemic racism has been a part of our country's history and modern society. K through 12 students deserve an educational experience in which the curriculum utilized is centered on truth, representation, agency, and freedom. In this presentation, I will share ways in which educators can feel supported in implementing this work, as well as facing barriers that might prevent moving forward with this work. There are many ways in which educators can feel encouraged to pursue racially just education in their learning spaces. Many districts offer professional training, professional development sessions, and coaching around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ways to implement culturally and historically responsive pedagogy. It's important when districts, schools, students, families, staff, and the community, and local policymakers all share a similar vision in how this important work can be implemented. So a collaborative approach usually ends up with more positive outcomes. A deep and thorough analysis of the curriculum that schools and districts utilize in their K through 12 learning spaces is critical to ensuring that resources, content, discourse reflect history and truth, representation, and the opportunity for activism for all of our students in our educational spaces. Leadership expectations at both the building level and district level are also pretty significant in the success of this work. As a whole, as a collective and collaborative mission, we should engage in deep reflection and confront our own biases and potential own hidden curriculum, and really ask ourselves if we are helping to reproduce a system of inequality. Even if an educator is not feeling encouraged or supported in this work, there is also the individual motivation that one can take to develop their own professional awareness and pedagogical approaches to pursuing this work. There are obstacles for some that are more serious challenges than others might face, depending upon something as simple as which state you live in. Our political landscape and the political climate, historically and currently, have always influenced the evolvement of our educational system. Kissel's article in this module did a nice job of highlighting some of those serious implications that educators can face when they do have that individual motivation to pursue this important work. For example, in Kissel's writing, he described some of the policy and laws that have been enacted in particular states. For example, the prohibited concept law, which limits the autonomy and agency for teachers to discuss and teach around issues of race, racism, and gender. An example Kissel shared was of a 16-year veteran teacher in Tennessee who was fired for discussing the concept of white privilege in his high school contemporary education class. Kissel also highlights how organized groups can be barriers to this work. For example, the group Moms for Liberty is active in 35 states with a mission to ban books in school curriculum that addresses race, racism, and LGBTQ plus identity. If you are working in a state that is not impacted by federal law or state and local policy, there can still be internal resistance among colleagues, among school board members, among district level staff that present resistance to this important work, creating obstacles for educators to make particular decisions in their instructional spaces. Villavicencio and colleagues highlighted the research practice partnerships model that really works to disrupt micro and macro systems of oppression in K through 12 education. This model shows a collaborative partnership between researchers, racially justice organizations, and K through 12 schools. The partnership ensures that all staff are receiving professional development and continued coaching throughout the 1 to 3 year partnership experience. This model aims to measure a true assessment of the school's racial climate and then collaboratively utilizes that data to create and implement sustainable racial equity plans for the school to move forward with. The article on research practice partnerships really highlighted the critical commitments that these partnerships ensure before moving through with this work. The research practice partnerships want to have a deep understanding of the complex conditions facing school leaders and staff, while also gauging their readiness to engage in this work. They take a lens in looking at the local political forces that could be influential, both positively and negatively. The research practice partnerships also are committed to assessing a district and school's motivation to provide resources and support towards this implementation. And there's also a deep commitment to gauge individuals' openness to being vulnerable to explore personal bias and institutional inequities. The research practice partnerships chiefly value solid, trustful relationship building as the basis to this work. They want schools to feel empowered. They want schools to feel that the plans implemented are sustainable. They want schools to feel that the culturally responsive teaching and learning practices that are implemented are truly reflected of the demographics of their schools and communities. The research practice partnerships know that this work does not come without tensions. They embrace these challenges. To quote, "We explicitly message that we do not move at the speed white people deem acceptable, nor do we minimize colorblind and race-neutral ideologies. This is expected because we've been socialized into a society where white supremacy is the norm. As we can see, though research practice partnerships work, have their own supports and their own obstacles, just as local districts, individual schools, and individual teachers face, the work is nonetheless important to continue to pursue. In my personal experience in regard to promoting anti-racism in teaching and learning, I've overall felt quite supported across the many different places I've had the opportunity to work at. To start, it has always been my foundational belief that students and families are at the heart of this work. They are central to what I do each and every day. So regardless of what the expectations have been on a school level or district level, I have always prioritized ensuring all students and all families feel represented, respected, and that they're getting equitable instruction from me across the board. Besides that innate moral compass that I suppose I've always carried, there are some pedagogical approaches that I do lean on, such as using literacy, in particular children's literature, and ensuring that my students and I are viewed as a community of writers. We are authors in our classroom. So using the power of reading, writing, and communication to build knowledge, support identity development and perspective taking, and to deepen relationships in my learning space has always been pretty pivotal. I also like to rely on art, music, and storytelling to integrate family and culture and traditions and community relations, and really ensuring that there is a sense of representation for everyone in my class and a sense of building pride of one's self, one's home, one's culture has always been interwoven into my curriculum and instruction. Not just the first week of school when we're all getting to know each other, but throughout the 9 months that I have them in my classroom. I've been fortunate to be engaged in some professional development that has enhanced my understanding, awareness, and ways to implement this work. This has occurred at both the district level and personal professional learning that I've sought out for myself, as well as now being in this SUNY program I have continued to develop this knowledge as equity, inclusion, and diversity has been a critical component in all the courses I've taken thus far. The New York State United Teachers Union is dedicated to improving the professional field. There are opportunities to promote social unity and increase cultural awareness in our schools and communities. There are tons of resources for activism being a part of this union here in New York State. In addition to resources that I find on their website to utilize in my classroom. There's also opportunities to be active in a political way at both the local, state, and national level. As we know, that's where we can really influence the change that we need. Of course, there have been challenges in my experience to pursuing this work. I would say the first challenge that I feel that has been most notable across the many places that I have worked is just that internal resistance at the colleague level. So in working across a grade level around perhaps curriculum development or planning or assessment, just facing some opposition to sort of new ways of thinking, methods of revising, or just simple reflection. It can sometimes feel difficult to kickstart this work when there isn't that cohesive mindset. So at times I have felt like the effort is more singular and sort of happening in a silo in my own four walls with my students versus happening across a whole grade level or school. In my experience, this is my 18th year in teaching. I have only faced two challenges from families where they resisted. They were resistant to me utilizing a particular children's title that was going to encourage conversation and discourse around equity, inclusion, and justice. These two families in particular felt that the topic was not developmentally appropriate for 5 and 6 year olds. They felt that young children didn't really have the cognitive capacity to process and critically think about these issues. Having clear communication with families has always been paramount in what I do. So in those two particular instances, those two students were able to just join a buddy class for that portion of the day in which I continued to proceed with the read aloud and discussion with the rest of the students. And there was no harm, no foul, no negative aftermath in working with that family, but clear communication around the instruction that was happening in the classroom has contributed to my success in pursuing this work, and also just being open to people that might have different perspectives and opinions than my own, and respecting that is important. The last challenge I would say is, I mentioned earlier about sort of my innate moral compass in just how I approach humans in general, but certainly the humane side of work in the educational field has always been pretty aligned with equally just practices. However, even though I carry this deep awareness, it's important for me to consider how I can consistently do this culturally and historically responsive work, and not just, spattered amount in a couple of different lessons throughout a year. How can I really interweave this in all I do? That would develop my own particular skill set in this and foster greater outcomes. I specifically chose, well, first, let me say the peer reviewed article that I came across was found in the International Journal of Child Care and Educational Policy. The article is called Who's Got the Power? A Critical Examination of the Anti-Bias Curriculum. And I specifically chose this article because of what I had just mentioned to some of those barriers with some people viewing anti-racism teaching as not being developmentally appropriate for young children. My expertise and 18 years of work in this field has mainly been with young children. So when I came across this article, it felt pretty spot on with why I wanted to choose it. And I was pretty eager to read the research. This article highlights scholarly literature that demonstrates that racial self-identification and racial criteria recognition. So a child, for example, not only recognizing their own race, but being able to look at someone else in their early care program and recognize, for example, that student's hair is not quite like mine, for example. That type of child development occurs between the ages of 3 and 4. Findings from this study also highlights when children, begin to develop racial attitudes. That typically begins to happen at age 3. Findings from the article demonstrates that young white children hold positive in-group attitudes. So they're pretty positive about their racial self-identity. This contrasts with Black young children and Hispanic children, in which they found that both groups view white as being superior and preferable to their own race and preferable to other minority groups other than their own. So there's this sort of positive evaluation of whiteness across the board for young children ages 3 to 7. The foundation of this article was really to examine the anti-bias curriculum utilized in early years environments. So they had a look at classrooms with students of ages as young as 2 up to 5 years old. And we're really trying to gauge the curriculum and how it helped develop identity. Did it allow for equal opportunity? And did it allow for student empowerment? And what they found that though an anti-bias curriculum does work to teach children to respect and appreciate human diversity, there are huge limitations to the component of criticality within the curriculum. There are no opportunities to deconstruct elements of power or privilege or whiteness. To quote from the article, In avoiding the discussion of white identities and white privilege, we reproduce the dominance of whiteness. The article sums up by discussing how we can include critical anti-racism teaching and learning with students in the age range of 4 through 8. The article talks about establishing a deep understanding of racial ideas and deconstructing whiteness. For example, drawing attention for young students in a tangible way to, for instance, economic aspects of white privilege, or how there's a positive representation associated with white. Simply asking young children, what does it mean to be white? And letting discourse unravel. In summary, I would like to engage in some continued deep reflection in regard to what is needed on my part to pursue this work, to critically analyze the curriculum that I design and deliver each day and the pedagogical practices that I employ throughout a school year, and to begin to take those consistent daily steps to promote a more racially just and equitable educational experience for all students. Here are the references that I used to create this presentation. Okay, thank you for viewing.